Hi there, my name is Aidan Petrie. I am the co-founder of the New England Medical Innovation Center, or NEMIC for short, which I founded with my friend Lydia Shin a number of years ago, I think back in 2017. My background has been for 32 years in innovation, and the last 15 years has been exclusively in the med tech space. So regulated medical devices, diagnostics, connected health, and so forth. And the reason that was with a company called Zymedica, and which we works with groups all over the world who have a need to commercialize a medical technology. We started NEMIC in order to address a very specific need in the industry that we had seen repeatedly through our careers as being a hurdle for entrepreneurs with promising technologies. And what we do at NEMIC is we provide mentorship. We have a tremendous education program. We provide a network. Ultimately, that leads to hopefully the ability for a company to get funded. We draw on a huge knowledge base that exists in the New England area. We also have soft landing workspace and put on events and things to promote what it is we do. The reason we do this is important, is that developing medical technologies is hard. And you need to bring together a whole series of different components to create a package that is investable. And what we had seen through our earlier careers was that companies that didn't quite know what that package should look like were then unable to gain funding, or they gained funding but they didn't spend it in the right way. And I should say here that the US medical system is not like anybody else's medical system. It's a very different program. It is financed a different way. It is much more fragmented than other programs, has a lot of different players and components. And so particularly for companies that are coming in from outside of the US, it is really important to sort of understand how it works. And that's way beyond regulatory. That takes you into a whole bunch of different areas. The talk that I'm going to give today, there are a series of talks in different areas. The specific talk that I'm going to give today is really on at a very high level on what a company needs to do to set itself up for that investment, and what the core elements that an angel fund or a VC are looking for from any particular entrepreneur. So that's what we will discuss today. And again, you'll see that there are a number of different elements to that. Okay, so the talk that I'm going to give here is a very much reduced version of the one that we give to entrepreneurs who are at a very early stage of development in this sort of med tech space, which as we've discussed could be diagnostics, connected health, device systems and devices. And the NEMIC focus is that they would be regulated under the CDRH category of the FDA. So I will go through this quickly, but the focus is really on trying to put together a narrative that is relevant to folk who are companies and entrepreneurs and startups who are looking to raise money. So that is the overall components are going to be working towards that. It's worth noting that innovation is important. It's important globally. It is important in the US.
And this is a particular quote from Eric Topol, who is a sort of guru in the industry, to really emphasize that there is no longer a place to have more and more expensive solutions in healthcare, and we have to innovate our way into a better system. That system, in an awful lot of the bulk of the products and companies that we're working with, that system is really one that is looking to provide products and services that are usable, that help lower costs and improve overall outcomes. And this was captured in, I think, 2006 or so by the Institute for Health Innovation, the IHI, in something called the Triple Aim. And this is an overriding emphasis that really every entrepreneur should be aware of and should be able to speak to. Now, the good news is that there are an awful lot of opportunities to improve healthcare. And these can be, this is a short list, there can be a very much longer list. But things like user focus, creating devices that can be used by the patient safely and effectively, products that promote adherence, and they can be, there are a lot of different ways of doing it, but one of the big issues in the industry is that patients and sick people do not do what they're supposed to do. And if we could get them to do what they were supposed to do, whether it's their physiotherapy or take a particular drug, that would be a good thing. Interoperability has been an issue for a long time. In the US in particular, there's a tremendous lack of standardization. There are more errors than we would love. There is a huge shift to moving devices and diagnostics into the home. And one of the last component here is sort of having devices that are and therapies that are emotionally supportive, that are not only sort of curing the immediate ill, but are also ones that take away some of the psychological aspects of sickness. There are a lot of the drivers in healthcare are interesting, and there are a number of them, but I'm going to emphasize three here that, again, any entrepreneur should be aware of. And that is that data is becoming more and more important. And this is why you see the Googles and Apples and Amazons all getting into healthcare, because they understand that in order to provide better, more specific healthcare, they need more data. And so companies like Google are extremely good at analyzing data. And data has huge value in a whole bunch of different ways that I can't go into now. Time is another currency of healthcare. And I think that it's true that 80% of all costs in healthcare come in the form of salaries and people getting paid to do something. And so if we can save time, we can therefore lower costs. And that's not by making people work harder, that's by looking for innovation efficiencies, innovations that allow workflows to be reduced and so forth. So the currency of time is huge. And then perhaps the biggest and most impactful is anything that can really stop individuals becoming sick in the first place. And it's been a well-known figure that's bandied around for years, that 70% of all healthcare issues are in the control of the patient. In other words, if you become overweight or you have heart conditions and so forth, an awful lot of that is actually, it comes out of your own behaviors. And so prevention there are a lot of aspects to prevention. The earlier one can diagnose that something might be going in the wrong direction, the sooner you can address it, the higher the costs you can save, and so forth. We've also got a lot of new technologies, and this is the tool set that we have here is significant. Artificial intelligence has been spoken about for a long time and is beginning to really take hold. And this is part of the system of being able to understand and prevent issues earlier on, and analyzing tumors at a earlier stage, or particular behaviors and so forth. Zero UI, which we would call in the US is typically Alexa, or a variant of Alexa. How we interface with our patients. It is not normal to interface with people through the thumbs of our and our cell phones. We normally talk to people, and so the opportunity to use a natural language interface to encourage patients to do the right thing, to inform them of when to take their drugs, et cetera, et cetera. These are huge opportunities, and you combine those with sensors and so forth, and it really sort of creates a whole new paradigm of connectivity and opportunity. Virtual reality has been around again for a long time, and has taken hold in certain areas, mostly the surgical suite and others, and maybe hasn't fulfilled its sort of promise to date. Rapid diagnostics are huge, as we've spoken about it. Just the sooner, the earlier that one can essentially figure out what a particular indication is, the early one can address it. Smartphone brings a whole lot of opportunities for geotagging, all those things that one can do with a smartphone that can help monitor, manage, etc. a patient's behavior, can be put to very good use. And then finally, and this is really the sort of overall what captures everything, is that we are moving to system-based solutions, which have diagnostics and devices and analytics and communication and so forth, and we're putting those together in packages that can provide enormous value and truly sort of change the way that we interface with our health. And this is perhaps the area that we're most excited about at NEMIC and in the US. But it also poses a lot with the opportunities, it poses a lot of different problems. Because you're putting together these packages of systems, of which some parts of it are regulated, some by one body, other bits are regulated by the FCC, and so you have to have a sort of very holistic view of how that interface is going to be managed and take place. At the same time, the impact is vast, and it is coming our way, whether we like it or not, and I think for the most part we like it. When we talk to an entrepreneur, we talk first at a very basic level, and these are three things that everybody should be able to articulate in a sentence, and they are: what is the user need, what is the market driver for that need, and what is the enabling technology. And in other terms, what clinical value is something giving, who is going to pay for that clinical value, and in the US the market is very different from most countries, and then what is the technology to deliver to that user need. And everybody who is listening to this video should be able to articulate those in one sentence. And we spend a lot of time just helping entrepreneurs really get their value proposition down. This is why, this is what I'm doing, this is why it matters, this is who's going to pay for it, and this is how I'm doing it. Also to be aware that there are different types of innovation, that all innovation is not equal. And this slide is simply one to say, understand what it is you're doing. If you're in a disruptive innovation, it's going to take a long time, it's going to cost a hell of a lot of money, but you might just change the world. Platform innovation is conducted mostly by the large strategic companies, and it is usually small changes to particular existing offerings and so forth. And then adjacent are combinations. This is where a lot of the system work comes in, combinations of putting together diagnostics and so forth into systems. And we at NEMIC typically are living with the adjacent and the disruptive with and advising. That's really where we're advising a lot of companies. These slides really talk about different areas that innovation takes place in. In devices, surgery, outpatient, home, other areas, wearables, etc. Digital is just coming across the board everywhere, and what's interesting about digital is how and where it can interface with you. But again, the same sort of areas that digital innovation is addressing, an enormous amount of opportunities to streamline workflows, etc. Diagnostics, I mean, we facetiously say smaller, faster, cheaper, personalized. It's a huge promise. It is that diagnostics are really very active right now, and it's just a great space to be in. And then service innovation, and this is perhaps where, while some of it may be regulated, not all of it is, but how can we improve workflows within hospitals? How can we detect whether an individual is going to fall down, or whether how can we keep patients in their home living well longer, and so forth. And really, just this can address so many different aspects, and is something that we're particularly interested in. When we finalize our work with entrepreneurs, we have this idea. There are some 7 elements that we really have to address before we would ever put them out in front of funders. And this is really sort of on the planning side. We need them to have a strong perspective of what the road ahead looks like, and I'll just sort of go through those. Every investor is going to need to know what that market and what that value is. Who is the market? How much of it can your innovation address? And what is the value to the system that will come out of that? And that really is the business proposition that every investor is looking for. I mean, they're not technology people for the most part. They are looking for this value point. How big is the market? What value does your innovation bring? How much are people going to pay for it? Who's going to pay for it? And that builds the business case for basically for an investment. IP is important because the protection for that investment is the intellectual property, and they are always going to be looking at IP and the portfolio and so forth. And it's just critical that there is robust IP in place that can be the basis of the investor can feel that they have been protected by. Bringing this product to market is going to take 3 years. It's going to cost $8 million. The only real protection is that they have a solid piece of IP. Regulatory path is also absolutely critical, because regulatory path really defines how expensive, how long the development path is going to be, what if a clinical study is needed, if it isn't needed, what validations are needed. So the understanding of the regulatory path is critical, and you want to know it early on. You do not want to find out things that you've got to do late in the process. And this, in a way, is where I think the device industry and device innovation is interesting because it tends to be front-end loaded. If you line up all these components correctly and thoroughly, then everything you've got to do after that is execution. So the actual risk going forward is lowered relatively early. And regulatory is absolutely a component of that. Design, to be clear, in the medical field, design is everything that takes place between a technology leaving the lab bench and being manufactured. So it's a very different use of the word design. It covers all the engineering, all the software, all the quality controls, prototypes, pilot, and everything, verification, validation. So just understand what all the components of design are. User, whether you've got instructions for use, packaging, etc., etc. All of these sort of would all fall under the design process. And once you know what regulatory you have to path you have to take, the design path essentially follows the regulatory path. And then manufacture and launch. This, oddly, is where many companies fall afoul. And because they haven't adequately understood the components of what needs to happen for a class 2 device to be manufactured safely and effectively, and then what it takes to launch a product. How do you get buyer adoption? How do you validate that something is going to be purchased at a given price, etc.? And so it is very important for an entrepreneur to have a consideration of that at an early stage. All of that runs into a planning process that essentially outlines what it is that you're going to go through for the next couple of years or whatever, how that market is going to be addressed, what the timing is, who you're going to need, etc., etc. And with the planning falls out of that, what sort of money needs to be raised, and then what are the key deliverables that need to be achieved and the milestones that need to be met in order to then have be able to move from smaller angel investments to larger VC investments and finally to growth capital investments at the end. Again, that's a gross generalization, but there's some truth in it. There's a good amount of truth in it. As we talked about, funding is behind all of this. Know what money is needed, be realistic about it, have all the components in place. So that, I think, is really what we help companies put together at NEMIC. For overseas companies, a lot of times they are coming in with something that may be more developed, but then adjusting it for the US market, understanding what the way the US market works. Particularly, I will take it back to understanding path to market. How are you going to put something on the market that has the impact that you would like it to have, but also delivers the margin that is available. I hope that was somewhat interesting. Like I said, this is a subject that one can talk about ad nauseum. And really what we try and do here is we work with companies on a one-to-one basis because they're all so different. And we try and curate a program for them that helps them come to market and be successful. So I hope that was useful, and I look forward to chatting with anybody who has viewed this at a later stage. Thank you very much.